opportunity to stand in front of you as I attempt to figure out what's wrong with the technology. It's a common theme this morning. You want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Hosea chapter 6. That's where we'll be starting this morning. I assume you have to turn this thing on for it to work. How's that? Hosea chapter 6. I'll do the Brady thing and tell you it's on page 794 in my Bible. But then I'll do the very non-Brady thing and put it up on the board where you can see it too. As I said, it's an honor to stand up here. It's definitely something that when I've been asked to do this, this is the second time that I've been asked to do this, and it's humbling to come up here and stand in front of you. It's also something that makes me appreciate Brady and what he does for us, and I know I give him a lot of fits because he deserves all of it, and then some. But the amount of time and effort and preparation that goes into just a lesson as short as this, in comparison to what he does for us every week, the quality of material that he brings, it's definitely something that makes me appreciate him and appreciate what he does for us a lot. The reason I wanted to do this lesson was just reading the Bible, kind of doing the morning routine, and something really popped out at me that I don't think I'd heard it, I'd read it, but it never really hit me before. I was reading in Matthew, and it was when Jesus quoted Hosea and rebuked the Pharisees for not understanding what it meant that God desired mercy rather than sacrifice, and that just kind of stuck in my brain, and I thought that would be a good lesson to go with. So maybe if this will work. In Hosea the 6th chapter, God is once again very unhappy with Israel. Starting in verse 4, he says, "O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, like the early dew that goes away. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets, I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and your judgments are like light that goes forth. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." So what's going on in this passage? What have the Israelites done to anger God? It says there that their faithfulness is like morning dew, and for those of you that were here Wednesday night, that is not ragweed, that is standard lawn grass up there. But we all know, we've all experienced the morning dew. It comes on, it's heavy, and then by 10 o'clock in the morning, you no longer have an excuse not to mow the yard because it's gone. It vanishes quickly. And so the prophet there says that their faith was like morning dew, that it came and it was there, but it vanished quickly. It reminds me of the parable of the sower. When Jesus talked about faith that springs up, it's choked out. The heat burns it away. And so almost 800 years later, when we get to the Pharisees, that same problem continues to exist. We read it in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 9. Jesus' first interaction with the Pharisees, where he quotes that. It says, "As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, 'Follow me.' So he arose and followed him. Now it happened as Jesus sat at the table in the house that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, 'Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?' And when Jesus heard that, he said to them, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.'" And then you fast forward a couple chapters, again in Matthew the 12th chapter, starting in verse 12, it says, "At that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what it is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.' But he said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. Now when he had departed from there, he went to their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. And he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. Great group of guys. Really, really good group of guys there. And so, we have to ask ourselves, what did God mean when he said, and when Jesus quoted, I desire mercy and not sacrifice? Is sacrifice not pleasing to God? I think anybody who's a casual student of the Old Testament knows that sacrifice is pleasing to God. We can read the entire book of Leviticus if anyone would like to. Raise your hand. Put your hand down, Ben. We are not going to read the entire book of Leviticus. But we all know that the book of Leviticus and the entire Old Testament is full of instances and examples of sacrifices being offered, of those sacrifices being a pleasant aroma to God, and of the children of Israel being pleasing in his sight. So he's not telling them that he doesn't want them to sacrifice. Does that mean that we can pick and choose what commandments to follow? Does that mean that Jesus and God are giving us license to, well, I don't really want to do this, but I'm really good at this one, so I'm going to do this one, and I'm not going to... I don't think that we can make that argument. You read in Matthew the 5th chapter, starting in verse 17, Jesus says, Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. So Jesus isn't giving us license here to pick and choose what commandments to follow, obviously. And he's not telling us that sacrifice is not pleasing and important to God. Let's think of it in different terms. Our relationship with God, many times in Scripture, is compared to a marriage. The church is often referred to as the bride of Christ. And that's something that it's an analogy we all understand. We understand what a marriage is, what makes it work. And we've got a lot of marriage experts in the crowd. We could probably define very easily the elements of an ideal marriage. First and foremost, she has to know how to cook bacon. Let's just get that out there right now. For those of you getting ready to get married, Courtney, don't be shaking your head. Learn how to cook bacon. And if I could use the pulpit for one personal opinion, it is that bacon should be cooked chewy and not crispy. Because crispy bacon is not okay. Alright? So she's got to know how to cook bacon, right? And she's also got to make sure that the shirt gets ironed just right. Because if there's too much starch, it's scratchy. And that's not good. That's not okay, right? And he's got to take out the trash. Before it even gets to the point that it's stinky and stuff's falling off, take the trash out, right? And make sure that the yard stays mowed to the regulation height. Because we want our place to look good, okay? These are the things we do for each other. And she's got to make sure that the children are all adorable and rosy-cheeked. And I love it when we dress babies in big people clothes, because that's just neat. Right? Looking good, Logan. Those things are important. They're vitally important. We got to make sure the oil changes get done every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, depending on driving conditions and whether or not we're running synthetic. Right? These things are very important. They're vital. We got to do them. And what if that's all your spouse ever did? What if she jumped out of bed first thing in the morning, ran in the kitchen, cooked you a perfect breakfast, had it laid out on the table, cup of coffee just right, perfectly ironed shirt, matches your clothes for you, because sometimes we need help with that, ladies. We need that. So they got them laid out for you. She does all that. She lines the children up to pass morning inspection. And then she vanishes. And you don't see her again until the next morning when she jumps out of bed and makes your coffee and lays your clothes out. And she's never there to talk to you when you're going through something hard. And she never tells you how much she appreciates the sacrifices that you make. And he never brings you a cold Coke and a Hershey bar when you're having a tough day with the kids. And she never tells you that you're doing a good job. You never tell her that she's doing a really good job raising the kids. You never tell you that you're the only one that she desires, that you're the only one that he has eyes for. How loved would you feel? Because feel is the key word there. It is easy to fake the external aspects of pretty much anything, right? Especially with the advent of Facebook, it's really easy to have a picture-perfect relationship on the outside. But you cannot fake a feel. You simply cannot fake a feel. Something that's always kind of struck me is, it's a passage in 2 Samuel chapter 24. We talk about mindsets, and we talk about focus and where our heart is supposed to be. 2 Samuel chapter 24, starting in verse 18, David had sinned against God, and it caused something terrible to happen in the land of Israel. There was plague, there was pestilence, people were dying, and he begged God to punish him because it was his sin. Starting in verse 18, it says, And Gad came that day to David and said to him, Go up, erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David, according to the word of God, went up as the Lord commanded. And Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming toward him. So Araunah went out and bowed down before the king with his face to the ground. Then Araunah said, Why has my lord the king come to his servant? And David said, To buy the threshing floor from you, to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be withdrawn from the people. Now Araunah said to David, Let my lord the king take and offer up whatever seems good to him. Look, here are oxen for burnt sacrifice, and threshing implements, and the yokes of oxen for wood. All these things, O king, Araunah has given to the king. And Araunah said to the king, May the Lord your God accept you. Then the king said to Araunah, one of my favorite passages in Scripture, one of my favorite verses, No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price, nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which costs me nothing. It's important to remember, David understood something there that often escapes our grasp. If our service to God comes at no cost to us, if it's completely inside our comfort zone, then it's probably not what it should be. And so we get back to our Pharisees. Even 2,000 years later, now in modern times, calling someone a Pharisee is an insult. You have to work hard to be an insult for multiple millennia. You really have to be extraordinarily bad. I mean, the Pharisees, the Cretans, and I really can't think of anybody else. Maybe in another 2,000 years, Cleveland Browns fans. I don't know. And I'm throwing that out there. I don't know anything about sports, so I hope that applied. But the Pharisees, we all sin. And I think we know that. That's not, maybe there's somebody that doesn't. I think most of us would acknowledge that we all sin. But the sins of the Pharisees really seem to get under Jesus' skin, as you might say. You go to Matthew the 23rd chapter. We'll read most of the chapter, not quite all of it, but most of it. It says, Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. For they say and do not do. They bind heavy burdens that are hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad, and they enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at the feasts, the best seats at the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. That he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
And we started now with 8 woes in verse 13. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore he who swears by the altar swears by it, and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits on it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so you outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? I would not want to be on the receiving end of that speech from Jesus. That was harsh. That was a harsh rebuke for a group of people. And so we go back and we kind of look through the individual sins that were listed. They shut up the kingdom of heaven. They made it impossible to come to know God. They put on long, pretentious prayers. They did the phylactery thing, which we'll get to that in a minute. They were dishonest in their business dealings. They robbed widows of their houses. They worked to convert people to their beliefs instead of God's commandments. They made up arbitrary rules for other people to follow. They focused exclusively on the rote external aspects of religious service. They did everything to receive praise from men. And if anybody has ever wondered what a phylactery is, because I'll be honest, I always have, that is a phylactery. I had to Google that. It's a box with a string on it that you tie to your forehead, and there's a scripture inside it. So, if you didn't know what a phylactery was, you learned something this morning, because I didn't either. But when we get down to the heart of the matter, service to God it's a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of the body. It's not a matter of anything external. It's a matter of the mind. God does not see things the same way we do. If you look in 1 Samuel chapter 16, Samuel is out at the house of Jesse to pick a successor to Saul, to pick another king for Israel, and he's going through the sons of Jesse, and he comes on one that he knows is the one that God is going to anoint, because he's tall, and he's strong, and he's handsome, and he looked like me. Right? Not so much. And God told Samuel, starting in chapter 16, verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. And so we can read through and we can see various points in Scripture where a man thought he was justified and God didn't.
Take the rich young ruler. We mentioned that in class briefly. The rich young ruler, Matthew chapter 19 and verse 16. He comes up to Jesus and says, "Behold, one came to him and said, Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?" And so he said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. If you want to enter into life, keep the commandments." And he lists the commandments, and maybe with just a slight touch of arrogance, the young man tells him, "All this I've done since my youth. Check, I got that. We're good. What do I lack? What do I still lack?" And Jesus tells him, "If you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come follow me." But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Do you think that Jesus said that to him at random? Do you think that that was something he just pulled out of the air and said, "One more thing that you can do and you'll be good"? Or do you think Jesus immediately knows what stands between our hearts and him? For the rich young ruler, and for me, and for you. You look also in Luke, the 10th chapter, the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's another one that I really like. And I think we're all familiar with it. You know, the Pharisee is trying to test Jesus and wants to know what he needs to do. And so, Jesus tells him to love your neighbor as yourself. And he, wanting to justify himself, says to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And do you think he expected the answer that he got? Or do you think he was completely and utterly floored when Jesus showed him what was wrong in his heart? We read also in Luke, the 18th chapter and verse 9. This is another one of my favorites. I've got some favorites. We've all got favorites. The Pharisee and the tax collector is one of my absolute favorite accounts in Scripture. It says also, he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess." And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So can we fall into the same trap as the Pharisees? This would be a very long and pointless lesson if the answer to that question were no. Obviously we can. What are some things that get us? And when I say these things, I say them to myself, and I give that caveat every time that I stand up here. If I step on toes, I'm stepping on my toes, because these are things that through my study I identify that I struggle with, and so maybe they're of value. One thing that can get us is not worshiping in truth and spirit. John the 4th chapter, verse 23, it says, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth." So what does it look like when we worship in spirit? When we sing songs, do we focus on the words? Do I really focus on what those words are saying? Do I know what Ebon Pinion means when I sing it? Do I understand and think about Jesus' suffering when I take the Lord's Supper? Or am I on autopilot? Am I blanking out? Is my mind wandering? Or does what we do here deserve my full focus and attention? Because I know for me sometimes my mind's wandering when it shouldn't. Another thing that we sometimes fall into is not diligently seeking. In Acts the 17th chapter and starting in verse 24, it says, "God who made the world and everything in it, since He is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is He worshipped with men's hands as though He needed anything, since He gives to all life, breath, and all things. And He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell all the face of the earth. and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. When we talk about diligently seeking something, I started running recently. I don't really know why, nothing was chasing me, but I started running, and I decided that, at work in the spring, they're going to do this 5K. I've never run a 5K in my life, so I thought, you know what, that's my goal. I'm going to run in a 5K, and I'm going to run the entire thing. I'm not going to walk. I'm going to run the entire thing, and I'm not going to finish last. And nobody pushing a baby in a stroller is going to beat me. Hopefully. Right? So I've started training towards that goal, which is not super impressive, but, get out there and run. I even read a blog on running, most of it anyway, half the first post. So now I'm a certified internet expert on running. Any questions that you have, I can answer. But if my goal is to someday run a marathon, let's say I just get crazy and I want to run a marathon, I'm probably going to need to spend some time on that treadmill every day. Right? If our goal is heaven, we probably need to spend some time in this every day. We talk about, our kids sing a song in being in the Lord's army. I'm in the Lord's army. And that's a great song, and it's a great analogy. I love it. And it seems sometimes, at least for me, like we go down to join the Lord's army, we go to the recruiting station, we're like, hey, is there a National Guard option in this army? Can I give you 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, and if something kind of serious comes up, y'all will call me? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Hebrews 11:6 says that God rewards those who diligently seek him. Not haphazardly seek him, not sometimes seek him, diligently seek him. Another thing that can get us is ignoring the internal. I think sometimes we can focus on things that are important, like scriptural purity. It's obviously one of the most important things that we have. I think we all understand that following the commandments of the Lord accurately is one of the most important things we do. And if you don't understand that, ask Nadab and Abihu. It's important. It's really important. But it's not the only thing that's really important. You go back to Matthew 23:23, what we just read. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, the tiniest little spices, the tiniest aspects that you can have. We tithe even those. And have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. The other thing we can do is be hearers only. James 1:22. Be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. If any among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Like Lucy said this morning in class, that faith is an act of faith. It's apparent. It does something. It changes you. It's outwardly apparent. It's like going to the doctor. If you go to the doctor because you're sick and he comes in and he tells you, you need to do this, you need to take this medicine, or you need to stop eating this, and it's perfect, good advice. It gets right to the heart of the matter of what you need, and then you walk out of his office and you forget everything he said and you keep going on just like you were before. Why did you go in the first place? What good was it? If we come here and we hear the word and it doesn't change our lives, then why are we here? If we leave what we hear in the pew and it doesn't follow us out into the world, why bother? Another thing we can get into is shining our lights instead of letting our lights shine. In Matthew 6, verse 1, it says, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward for your Father who's in heaven. That's something that we need to remember, especially in the days of Facebook and social media and things like that. We have to be careful when we do things. Now, does that mean that we don't do good things because we think we might be noticed? No, you do good whenever you have the opportunity to do good, but remember that God always knows the motive behind the deeds. Another thing that can get us is assuming justification. When we look back at our example of the Pharisee, he thought he was justified because he was hitting the high points. He was getting everything. He was giving his tithes. He was fasting. He was doing all these things, but he completely missed the heart of the matter. And we have to be careful sometimes that we don't sit back and say, we got all the don'ts down. Right? We don't have instrumental music. We don't have female elders. We don't have that. Therefore, we're justified. No. We do need to do those things because we can't be justified without them. But without the heart being in the right place, we can't be justified. So how do we avoid some of these things? How do we avoid falling in the trap? First, suggestion is to remove our stumbling blocks. Identify them honestly and remove them. And we read the discourse, and it's repeated in the Gospels. In Matthew 18, it says, starting in verse 8, it says, if your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it's better to enter life crippled or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be cast into the eternal fire. If your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it from you. For it's better to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be cast into hell. So let's make a modern application of that. It's better to enter into heaven with a flip phone than to be cast into hell with an iPhone. Technology can get in the way of our service to God. I know it happens to me. I find myself sometimes, I got an email. Let me check this real quick. Let me... And then 15 minutes later, I look up after seeing cat pictures on Instagram, and I have no idea where he is or what he's talking about. And if that's you, like it is me, leave it in the car. Don't bring it in. Oh, but my Bible's on it. We have paper Bibles. They don't have Facebook in them. You will not get distracted unless you're like me and you also like to start reading stories. But you take steps. You identify those stumbling blocks, and you take steps to remove them. And be honest about it, because just like the rich young ruler, Jesus knows what your stumbling blocks are. And he knows if you don't confront them. Another thing we have to remember is to take opportunities to do good. Because we'll see them. We have them. We have opportunities to do good in our lives. Matthew 25 and 34. The king will say to those on his right hand, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? Then the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. Our world is full of people that would cherish the gifts we have to offer. And if you notice, in that discourse, none of those things offer money or involve money. I think a lot of times we default back to money quantifying everything. None of those things involve money. They involve time, or a very small pittance of money. You can't put a dollar amount on the value of a visit to a sick person in the hospital, of a phone call, of a card in the mail. There's no dollar amount that you can place on that, but it makes the most enormous difference of all. Another thing, and this is where I'll step on all my toes, is speaking truth in love. Look at the example of Apollos in Acts, the 18th chapter, starting in verse 24. Now a Jew named Apollos, an Alexandrian by birth, an eloquent man, came to Ephesus, and he was mighty in the Scriptures. This man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he was speaking and teaching accurately the things concerning Jesus, being acquainted only with the baptism of John. So he wasn't teaching fully. And he began to speak out boldly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. They didn't jump up and yell at him. They didn't call him out. They took him aside and they explained it more accurately. We can't rejoice or feel superior when we find somebody that does not have the same understanding of the Scriptures that we do. We can't come across as attacking them when we try to point out to them a more accurate understanding of the Scriptures, because if they feel attacked, they're not going to listen to what we have to say. Then it becomes an argument, and nobody, I checked the history on this, nobody in the history of mankind has ever had their mind changed in an argument. Ever. It just doesn't happen. And the other thing we have to remember is that when we're asking someone else, when we're asking a friend to have an open and honest examination of what they believe and what they think that the Scriptures say, we have to be willing to do that too. We have to be willing to lay aside our preconceived notions, because maybe we don't understand it. Maybe they can show us something. Maybe we open our eyes and we open our hearts and we let them and we let ourselves see what the Scriptures say. And then it's not me telling you, it's the Scriptures telling you. So the conclusion of the whole matter, we'll leave it at this. The scribe asked Jesus in Mark 12:29, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus answered and said, the foremost is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. The scribe said to him, Right, teacher, you have truly stated that he is one, and there is no one else besides him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as himself is much more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. If we approach our daily lives with that mindset, if we approach our service to God with the mindset that we will love Him with all our heart and all our strength, we will love our neighbor as ourselves, we will find opportunities to praise God in our everyday lives. We will find opportunities to tell others about Him, and we'll find opportunities to do good for our fellow men. And we'll be a lot better off. So I'll leave you at that. If you have need of the brethren, we stand ready to assist you. You come as we stand and as we sing.